Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Beyond the Yellow Tape. It's been a while, and we're very happy to have you guys back with us. We have another great episode, another riveting episode, another informational episode for you guys in the books. Before I let Nidhi introduce our guest today, I just want to welcome aboard our first official sponsors, Ishi and Promega. It means so much to have someone believe in your work. So great things to come from this partnership. Better content, better videos, better quality. So thank you guys so much. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll let Nidhi take it from here.
And more in-person podcast. I'm really looking forward to that. I have to go to New York.
There we go.
So today, like Julian mentioned, we will be getting deep into forensic genealogy. So honestly, when I talk about forensic genealogy, the one person that pops in my head, the pioneer, I would say Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick. She's widely recognized for her work in forensic genealogy. She's also been into organizations, part of organizations such as the Indentifinder International, and also was a co-founder of the DNA DOE project. She is actively involved and was pioneered in the use of genetic genealogy, including YSTR and SNPs, analysis for forensic intelligence, generating forensic intelligence testing for cold cases. And some cases are really, really old, I would say like decades old. She also served as a forensic genealogist on several historic projects, including the identification of an unknown child on the famous ship that sank. Remember Titanic? And she was also part of the Abraham Lincoln DNA project. So there's a list would go on and on. So I will definitely keep my mouth shut and we'll talk to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick now. Thank you.
So Dr. Fitzpatrick, what would you say the simplest way to define forensic genealogy for those of us who don't know?
Well, it's actually quite simple. For years, genealogists have been using Ancestry, 23andMe, etc., to help adoptees find their bio parents or bio families. And, we basically do the same thing. An adoptee will take a DNA test, they'll put it in the big database. They'll get a list of people who are their sort of DNA cousins. And they won't know who these people are, but somehow they figure it out and they can figure out who their biological family is. And we do the same thing because it doesn't matter if you're an adoptee, you're working on a John Doe case, or you working on a violent offender case. You're dealing with DNA from somebody and you don't know who it is. And you're going to find out through all these DNA cousins that come up on your list. Now, I have to say, we don't use Ancestry. We don't use 23andMe. We use our own database, GenMatch, but it's the same process. It really is. And my 30-second explanation that I've used is that, you log in, you see these DNA cousins. And as I said, you have no idea who they are, but you find out. And then because they're all related to you, they're related to each other in some way. So what you do is it's like a big Sudoku puzzle. You kind of move them around, you try and find out how they're connected, self-consistent, and finally you come up with a self-consistent arrangement, where everybody's related to everybody else just the right way, horizontal, diagonal, vertical, and there's going to be one piece missing to the puzzle, and that's the person you're trying to identify. Fits in, and that's it.
That's amazing. So you said you use a different database. So was that something that people in forensics saw the need of and started putting in information for the in the database, or was it something that was a spinoff or from Ancestry.me or 23andMe?
Yeah, it was already there. It started in 2010. It was completely independent from all of that, and it was made as eventually it emerged as an independent platform where everybody from any company could upload. And so, because if I was like testing with Ancestry, I wouldn't be able to look over the fence to see 23andMe, all those people. You can't do that because it's a different company. So they
Right.
made this database, and everybody from any company can download their data from Ancestry or another company and upload it to GenMatch. And if I did that and I tested at Ancestry, I can see people did the same thing. Not everybody, but somebody from 23andMe that did the same thing would be on. I could start seeing these other people that ordinarily I wouldn't be able to see. And then furthermore, it's got a lot of tools that we made for ourselves. And we know, and those big companies, they really, that's not their strong interest, to make all these cool tools for us. They make enough, but when we get a hold of it, we've done a much better job on GenMatch.
Right.
So
Is the GenMatch, is that like a who is in that? Is that like a convicted felon database or something like that, or is it who comprises the population for that?
Well, it was started in 2010 as just genealogists. If you got tested with Ancestry, you want to expand your horizons to see if there's other people out there. You go over to GenMatch, you download your results from Ancestry. You can do that. They're yours. You upload them to GenMatch, and it's a different fishing pond. So in 2017-18, genealogists like myself figured out, well, we're being so successful with Ancestry and adoption searches. There's over a 50% chance you can find your biological family doing that. How come we can't do this with John and Jane Does? How come we can't do this with violent offender cases? And when Ancestry and 23andMe pretty much said, no, we're not interested, then GenMatch became the place to do that. And so at the beginning, there was no real restrictions on what you could do. We uploaded, we couldn't go to Ancestry and 23andMe. So we figured out a way to go to a private lab, a different lab, to get that same kind of data made. And then we uploaded it. We couldn't upload it to Ancestry, so we uploaded it to GenMatch, and that was our working database where we could find matches. But we are really trying, that is made up of regular genealogists who are doing recreational genealogy using that. And then it just has developed into a law enforcement tool over time.
Okay.
That's amazing. Just a very stupid question. I think we very well know in the field of forensics whether Jane Doe or a John Doe is. Can you give just a little bit of idea as to what does that mean and why do we use those names?
Well, it's sort of the common term here in the U.S. for unidentified human remains. And so it means a man, basically generic. You don't know who he is and he died. A woman, you don't know who they are. A baby doe would be a baby and died. Teen doe, we've had some teen does, teenage does. And so I don't know where the name Doe came from, but John Doe, Jane Doe, baby doe, it just means unidentified person died. You don't know who they are.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you. That would be really helpful for a lot of people. Also, when we talk about studying the DNA patterns, like at least what I know in the field of DNA, we look at STRs. We get electropherogram profiles that we generate at the end, and we compare those DNA profiles. How is it the same in genealogy, the data that you see in GenMatch, or is it a different representation of the data that you
Oh, it's completely different, because when you use the STRs, either Y-DNA or CODIS, you're really dealing with CODIS has 20 markers. The Y-filer PowerPlex kits have at most 27. And you're dealing with markers that have some length. That's why they call short tandem repeats.
Right.
Short, long, short, long. It means it's got some length to it. And so, you have let's say a relatively few markers with its pieces of DNA real estate on the chromosomes. When you deal with genealogy, you're dealing with SNPs, and those are the SNPs. The S is single, stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. The S is single, and that means they're points. So we deal with 1.2 million points. And so then at that point, it's not a question of do my million points match your million points. It's more like we can go into how much DNA do you share with me? Are half of your SNPs the same as mine, or so on? And that goes in, allows relationship estimates. That's where genealogy comes in. if you share 10% of my DNA, then you have to be sort of on the order of a first cousin, and that gives me a hint on how we're connected.
Right. So the sharing between two individuals and the percentage of the matching helps us determine the hierarchy that you would be in. If you have the maximum sharing, you would be the closest person related, and then it goes down and you're further away.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And when you talk about SNPs and getting more technical here, how much DNA do you think is required when, just a ballpark, amount-wise, that you would require when you are doing all these estimations and projections?
Well, I want to say that you asked me about what the data looks like when it comes in.
Right.
Now, in STRs, you'll see a ferrogram,
Right.
little ellipse. But this, the actual raw data like that is a long text file with 1.2 million lines in it. So, it doesn't mean anything to you. It's not useful. So you upload it to GenMatch, they do whatever calculation they do, and what you come up with is a list of matches and how close they are, their names or their screen names and their email addresses so you can contact them.
Oh.
You don't really ever work with the raw data yourself.
Okay.
You let the algorithms in the background, mess with that, and then they give you the list to work with. That is more, that's for you, that's more easy for you to deal with. It's in a form that you can deal with and see and understand, rather than a bunch of numbers and letters that don't mean anything.
Right. So you're not sitting there looking at the sequences and matching it. You get an estimate with information from the individuals that might have a close relationship with the person in question.
Yeah, correct.
That's amazing. I've never worked with the software, so I have no idea how it works, but
yeah, well, that's they do that in the background. They don't, you don't have to worry about that. They just give you a list of matches and an estimate of the relationship mainly, and that's what you have to work with.
Okay. So that's when people use the term like whole genome sequencing comes in.
That is like at the very beginning. Okay. What that is it's really very interesting, because what it does is it makes an electronic copy of the DNA. And I think that's so useful and important, because in any forensic operation like this, you're gonna consume the DNA. So when you do CODIS markers, you consume the DNA, you can't do anything more with it. That's it. But when you do whole genome sequencing, you have an electronic copy of everything that's there. So today, you can even maybe pull CODIS markers out of that. You can pull MITO out of that. You can pull SNPs out of that. You can pull you can do tons of stuff with it. And it's always going to be there. The DNA is memorialized so that 5 years from now, if somebody comes up with some other cool thing to do, the data's still there, and you do consume the DNA, but you have something to show for it that you can use a long time. So, so the whole genome sequencing is that's the very first step. Now, once you have that, there's a second step, and that's when a bioinformatics person comes in and picks out the SNPs. In our case, he's going to pick out the SNPs we need for genealogy. He may be called on, let's say 2 or 3 years from now, when all that's developed, to say, hey, can you get the CODIS markers out of this for us? But right now we're just interested in the SNPs. So that person has software and, gives us the raw data we go up on GenMatch with. That's an intermediate step. And the cool part about it is that when you have the whole genome, if your DNA is degraded, let's say you have holes in it, because humans are basically 97% the same, you can go in and you can patch those holes, because the context. If you have most of it and you have a hole, pretty much what's going to go in there, with exception of 1 or 2 markers or something. It's called imputation, and that way you can actually repair the DNA electronically.
Right. But then there has to be some limitations to it, I presume, because then we would all be doing whole genome sequencing for every sample in question.
Well,
So
yeah, because the crime labs don't do this. This was, we were genealogists, happy doing our thing, and then because Ancestry wouldn't work with us, that was one thing that happened. It was like they didn't want to do forensic cases. So we had to find an alternate approach. And that alternate approach was to go to a lab that did whole genome sequencing and could pick out those markers for us. That was one approach that we used. And I will tell you, this was at the very beginning, of course, nobody knew if this was going to work. There was a genealogist whose father had died, and he wanted to get his father tested with 23andMe, but he couldn't, right? The father was dead. And those companies normally require you to spit in a little cup. The father was dead. So he got a piece of his tissue sample, his biopsy sample, because the father had died of cancer. And he sent it to a private lab, and the private lab did whole genome sequencing on it, and then picked out the right SNPs and made data for GenMatch. They made like fake Ancestry data and fake 23andMe data because the technology is all there. This is not proprietary. Ancestry lets you download your results. You know what markers they use.
oh,
So he had that. He said, here's my Ancestry results. Here's my 23andMe results. Can you take my dad's DNA and make something just like this? And they said, yeah, no problem. Went ahead. And then he uploaded that raw data to Ancestry to see what his list of DNA cousins was. Perfect, as if his dad was alive. He had himself, his cousins, his aunts, his uncle, and the dad fit right in there. So we
amazing.
said,
Wow.
and we didn't need Ancestry anymore. We didn't need their lab. We didn't need their database.
Right.
Did it. We maneuvered around them just like that.
Oh my.
That's
That's
um
amazing.
yeah, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't like that fashion, and you were pretty much talking earlier about how the Sudoku puzzle and moving everything around. Wasn't that how the Golden State Killer was caught using genealogy and that same, I guess, technique, I suppose?
Yeah, it was. Now, I want to say what I just said. When you upload and you do the whole genome sequencing, bioinformatics, that's one step to get it to where you start your Sudoku puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but you're right. And the Golden State Killer, now, we had a few months in early 2018 that were very exciting because DNA Doe Project, myself and Margaret, we actually solved 2 cases before the Golden State Killer hit the news. But because the ones we solved were John Doe cases, one was a guy, Joseph Chandler, who had stolen somebody's identity and they didn't really know who he was. And then the second one was Buckskin Girl, a young woman who was a body dump in Ohio, and they were trying to identify her too. We did those too, but they weren't as exciting, right, as the Golden State Killer. But all of that was used doing exactly what I told you.
Wow.
Mm.
That's amazing. I don't know. This blows my mind how it fits the puzzle. I do wish to talk a little bit about your involvement in different organizations as well, especially as we spoke about you in the introduction. You are a part of the Indentifinder International, and you were also a co-founder for the DNA Doe Project. So do you mind getting a little bit into those organizations and what is the main purpose and the goal for those organizations, and how do you play a part in those?
Yeah, I'm glad to. Indentifinders, we founded that in 2000, I think 11 or 12. And originally I had been doing other forensic work, but we got involved in military identifications, and they kind of required us to have more of a formal, we had to change our company to suit what they wanted. Let's put it that way. So Indentifinders really was started out doing that kind of work. But it evolved, into the more cold case work. In 2011, I approached the Seattle Police Department about an idea about using genealogy to solve their cold cases. and that was Sarah Yarborough case. It was a 1991 murder of a high school student in Federal Way outside of Seattle. So I happened to be in Seattle for another genealogy meeting, and I went a day early thinking I'll go talk to the police department with my new idea. So I went there, and, you know, let's say I got a very poor reception. You know, I got, it was, they didn't exactly laugh at me, but they were really kind of, the detectives were not really with it. You know, they were really kind of bothered that they had to come to this meeting with this little old lady, you know, having this brilliant idea. Well, there was a woman in the meeting named Jody Sass, who was a DNA analyst for the Washington State Crime Lab, I believe at the time. And she understood, because I was talking about using Y-DNA to get a last name. And the markers that the genealogists used were the same as the markers that the law enforcement used. So I told her, all you have to do is send me a PDF of the Y profile, and I could do whatever I need to do. Well, the detectives didn't quite get that in, but Jody Sass did. And then she said, well, we have a case we're working on a lot, and if the detectives come back to me again, I'll give them your contact information. And that was the Sarah Yarborough case. The detectives did come back to me. We did the Y-DNA. That went, I want to say that was so weird, because this is 2011 I'm talking about. We came up with the name Fuller, and the matches, the genealogist who matched Mr. X, let's say, they were all descended from a Robert Fuller who was in Massachusetts in the 1600s. So thinking back, this is common today, but here we are in 2011 with the detectives saying, we can't arrest somebody because they weren't on the Mayflower. You know, we can't, I don't know, you know, you're linking him to somebody in the 1600s, and the guy was not on the Mayflower. He was related to the Mayflower Fullers. And they said, we don't know what to do, and except try and put it in the newspaper. Well, the lead went cold. We did look in a bunch of Fullers in the area. Lead went cold. But then when SNP testing started to gain interest, I followed the technology from 2011 to 2019 until this technology was there to solve it. I tried SNP testing like 5 or 6 times, you know, but it wasn't there. It just wasn't there yet. So that started really, I guess, the big Identifinders kick off there, not knowing it would be that big. And then I solved the first case using genetic genealogy in 2015. That was the Phoenix Canal murders, where I gave the name Miller based on Y-DNA match. And that was Brian Patrick Miller. That narrowed the number of suspects from 2,000 to just 5.
Oh.
And so it was pretty quick. You know, they saw a Miller that really matched the psychological profile. And so they did their homework. And yeah, Brian Patrick Miller's DNA matched the crime scene DNA. And he's on trial right now. It's a death penalty trial. So that was like, Identifinders was that development. It was very difficult because the genealogy world, you know, really bullied me and hated me and ostracized me for using data, their data, public data, for a cold case and helping the police out. And they went berserk on that, but it's public data, you know, public data. So I stayed under the radar. And then, you know, Margaret contacted me in 2017 about this idea about SNP testing. And then, so that was, she didn't want to do violent crimes because she was afraid of the backlash from the genealogy community. Because as I said, GenMatch is built by genealogists for genealogists. And she was afraid that if there was a real big negative reaction, that would be taken away. So we didn't really, we had decided to do just the unidentified human remains. And we started on a couple of cases that way. And meanwhile, you know, Barbara Ray and the SAC DA people were moving forward with the Golden State Killer. You know, that was separate effort. We didn't know about that, but it all happened about the same time.
Oh, that's a lot of things happening from 2011, like in the direction.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
when you said Y DNA through both of those cases, that got you Miller and Fuller. What do you mean Y DNA?
Well, humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and they're match sets. You get one from mom and one from dad. So if the genes for blue eyes are in one chromosome from mom, the genes for brown eyes might be on the same chromosome from dad. But the last set, the 23rd pair, determines gender. Women have an X from their mom, an X from their dad. And men have an X from their mom and a Y from their dad. So the Y DNA tracks the male line. A man gets it from his dad, who gets it from his dad, who gets it from his dad. So like I had my brother tested for Fitzpatrick in 2000 because I figure if I found another Fitzpatrick that matched him, then I could say that was a relative of mine and I should talk to him about what he knew about the Fitzpatrick history. It was a link we could make in the absence of documentation. So that's what I mean by Y DNA. And that was the first test offered to the genealogy community because it was, it was simple. It was just simple, swab, send it in. And it was the first test used for forensics because the markers are the same for forensics. So there was no DNA that needed to change hands. It was just send me the PDF or the Excel spreadsheet or the Ferrogram and I'm done.
Right. So, like when you said in the Yarborough case that you went all the way back to someone off the Mayflower, you're pretty much looking up a guy's great times like 10 grandfather, pretty much.
Well, I didn't have to look up anything because the Y DNA matched a group of Fullers. So, okay, in the long run, I don't care what his genealogy is. I want his last name. Right. So you match, and it just so happens, and this is like never happened in the history of the universe before. So they're saying, where'd you get that from? And I said, well, this group of Fullers tracked back to somebody in Massachusetts in the 1600s. Okay. And, we're all doing a head scratcher on that because that guy must also be a descendant of that same group, but we don't know who he is. Now, I did try to follow the genealogy to see if anybody was wound up in Federal Way, but that, it was just too difficult. The records, some of them, like a lot of the records in New England, were held in the houses or the offices of the county recorder. And sometimes, there was floods, there was fires, there's all kinds of reasons they were lost. People threw them out after so many years. I couldn't really do a solid genealogy I actually did not do too bad all the way to Seattle and King County. There weren't that many. There was a kind of a weird thing that happened that Sarah Yarborough had a classmate named Fuller, and she was one of 5 daughters of a man named William Fuller. So he became a person of interest because of his name. Now he gave his DNA. He was not the killer. CODIS proved he was not the father of the killer. However, his Y DNA matched the killers. So he was some kind of cousin, but Y DNA doesn't tell you what kind of cousin. All it tells you is there's a male line connection. And so he was, we deduced he was a descendant of Robert Fuller as well, but where they connected, you can't tell. It could have been 10th cousins. We knew it wasn't his brother, his father, his immediate family were very small. So it had to be a little bit further back at least, but it could have been Robert Fuller himself. We didn't know, but he wasn't the killer.
Wow.
So we didn't know who this guy was. We had a possible last name. We had a cousin of his along the male line, and we had his genealogy going back to the 1600s, and we still didn't know who he was.
Is it still a cold case?
No, because as SNP testing developed,
right.
I kept trying. Finally, 2019, we nailed it. And his name was not Fuller. His grandfather was adopted.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my.
The name was Nicholas. His grandfather was on the orphan train in 1910, where they collected the orphans in New York and they put them on trains and they sent them to the Midwest. The train would stop, kids got off the train, Families picked out the ones they wanted. Rest of the kids got on the train and off to the next stop.
Damn.
Oh my. I'm still wrapping my head. I'm so sorry.
That's crazy.
So in regards to the research, when you do, like, you get all this information about the email address and things like that. Are there databases out there that contains public information about, I don't know, like more information about as to where they're located and what they do and things like that? Like, how do you move forward once you have information from GenMatch? Like, what are the
Okay, well, this is, you asked me two questions at one time.
Okay.
Okay, the first one is there are a lot of public records websites. We use Been Verified, and they provide, you know, a list of, they tell you the month and year somebody was born. They tell you their address history. They tell you their phone history. They tell you a list of related people. And normally you can guess if there's a mom and dad in there, you know, or a sister, brother, sister-in-law. And then Ancestry.com, we do use the databases. And we do Google, we use Facebook, a lot. Legacy.com has a lot of obituaries. There's, you know, you really can do, you have to be careful of misinformation, but, you know, there's a lot out there. Census records as you get further back. The next question is, how do you use all that? Well, I mentioned the Sudoku puzzle, and the way it works is kind of like this. You have these people, you find out who they are, maybe you find their parents, and you find out how old they are, and you find out where they live. So then if they are all related to you, they are related to each other, like I said. So as you start building these individual trees, you're going to see that these people connect with each other because they have common ancestors. They are related. And you build after a while, and in a perfect case, you will see one group matches each other internal to the group, and the other group matches each other internal to the group. But the two groups don't connect. And these are the two family trees of the mother and the father of somebody you're looking for. One of their children is the answer. And that child will be related to both parents, will be related to all the matches that you started out with in the beginning. Not that you know the exact connection to every single one of them, but you will have a group. You know, you'll be able to prove the sort of highway there back in the past with all those matches. And you can't distinguish siblings. You know, we had a case with 9 brothers, you know, so we had to figure out which ones were too old, which ones were too young, you know, who was living in town, who was dead, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah,
That's
that
crazy.
was going to be my next question. What would you do in cases of incest? Or
We
there's
actually have now that's where you get into the fine print, because
Okay.
yes, you can't always do what I said, because often you have very highly intermarried societies. French Canadians, like Maine, the state of Maine, is really difficult because French Canadians typically have had large families that intermarry, you know, with each other. So 3 sisters might marry 3 brothers, and the other family, and then maybe their first cousins would marry in the past. And the state of West Virginia is very difficult. Everybody in West Virginia is related to everybody else in West Virginia, I'm telling you. And then, no, don't laugh. I'm serious. You shake hands with somebody in West Virginia, and you're shaking hands, 2 West Virginia people shake hands, and they're shaking hands with their second, third, fourth, fifth, 6th cousin all at one time.
Oh
You know,
my, I did not know that. Well, they are number 1 in the Northeast for drugs. I didn't know even this is going on.
No, I could
Wow.
be why. So Virginia, Southern Louisiana, because of the influence from French Canada. The hills of North and South Carolina. Another very surprising area is the Four Corners area out west. And that is highly intermarried because the Spanish moved in the 1600s and they never left. they married the native women, and that continued, and now they're all related to each other in certain areas. So that is part of the fine print. And I mean, incest does happen. We do have a case of incest. It's very difficult. So then you have problems with recent immigration.
Right.
We had a case where the person we identified was first generation Irish American, and he had only very distant matches because, his family lived in Ireland for 1,000 years. They know everybody. There's no reason for those people to take a DNA test like there is for, say, somebody like me, that I don't know my real deep ancestry. You have that. You have underrepresented minorities. There's not a lot of Native Americans in the database. You have a lot of adoptees in the database. So sometimes you've got to, I'm not just saying look up on public record and it's somebody living in, New Orleans, Louisiana, and this is, sometimes that's true, but they've been adopted, and that's not, you don't need their legal name, you need their
Right.
body. So you got to solve their adoption first before you actually try to work what you're trying to do anyway.
Yes.
Mm.
And also, I feel like you just mentioned, that it's more populated with people who are like adoptees, or like who wish to know about their ancestors. Like, especially if I know with where I'm from, like in India, a lot of people don't get it done a lot because we can trace back to our ancestors like pretty easily. So is that a certain population that you think is like literally devoid of your database that's causing troubles, or I don't know, any population that's really standing out and you don't need more information from them? Do you see all those features?
I say the databases are populated with people like me that are American. My parents are American. I'm fifth generation Irish. I've been here a while. And I think that the databases have more people like me with my background because we don't know where we come from.
Right.
And we have disposable income. We're interested in genealogy. And so those companies that do the testing cater to like the population segment like me. And that's why those databases are full of people with those characteristics. We hope more African Americans, Native Americans, Orientals, Asian people test. That would be very helpful. And that's going to happen over time. I'd say the Asians are the least people to test, I'm guessing, because they have, in Japan, you have a koseki, that's your official genealogy registered with the government. So you don't need anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Same with us. Like traditionally we would have a bookkeeper who has all the information about us, like from ages, like goes 50, 60 years back. So we don't need it in a way. So with this limitations, do you think it's getting more difficult to pin down to individuals? And what do you think would be necessary steps to take to improve it in the future with all these court cases that you can work on?
Actually, I think I can't say it's getting easier. There are a lot of moving parts here. The easy cases have, been cleaned out to a large extent. Not that, they come up again, So the easy cases have been cleaned out, meaning the harder ones are the ones that are coming in.
Right.
And we're really, at first, this was looked at as an amazing thing that was going to solve every cold case on earth. But it turns out that's not the case. And we are developing a profile of a FGG cold case, one that isn't, workable or solvable using this brilliant new technique. And I want to say there's a difference. If you, in the CODIS era, when you had a cold case, if you didn't have a CODIS hit, you're done. You have to wait till one pops up.
Right.
But with FGG, just because you have a cold case doesn't mean it's going to go unsolved forever, because more people join the database and you don't need a direct hit.
Yes.
You can have another cousin. We've had that happen. Another cousin showed up out of the blue and you go, where did they come from? And you solve the case. So it's not, I would say, it's very hard for me to believe that there is an eternally cold case, that there is a case that absolutely cannot be solved using FGG. Whether it will or not within, a given length of time is up for grabs, but I think it can be solved if you really want to do that.
Right.
You could, in one case, let's say you find somebody from Morocco. There's not a whole lot of people from Morocco in that database. But maybe,
Right.
for example, you reach out to the Moroccan community, or somebody in Morocco that can do some genealogy for you, or you start to solicit tests from the Moroccan community, get their help in solving the case. See, it's not really as bad as you think. You can do it, but are you willing, how long, and are you willing to do it, devote the time?
Right. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
so it's mainly patience that you have to show in this field, that it, I guess.
Yeah.
I have a few more questions. Do you want to go, Julian?
Yeah, I was thinking about this case back in New York, and I think there's also that one case back in Italy back in the day. They were talking about, they use the term dragnet. I don't know if that was in terms of forensic genealogy. Like there was a case of a woman who was killed like jogging in the park, and they wanted to do like a dragnet of like just getting as much people's DNA from the area as they could. I don't know if you heard about that. I don't know if they were using that to do people's, just to hopefully stumble upon the person, or if they wanted to use forensic genealogy to find a relative of the person who might have done it. There's a case
I
in New York
think,
and one in Italy back in the day.
no, wait, are you talking about the Central Park jogger? I think there was a case a few years ago of a woman who was assaulted in
Yes.
Central Park. What they did, what they wanted, I think this is right, that was familial searching. And what they did,
Right.
this is a 1-to-1, and New York was not allowing familial searching. So familial searching is like 1 to almost 1. It allows you some leeway to look at matches in CODIS that are not the same, not an exact match, but might represent a family member.
Mhm.
But the way it works is it's only an immediate family member. So you're only going to come up with a parent, a child, maybe a sibling, maybe. So it's very limited, but I think that case, the law was passed to allow New York to do familial searching, which gave the authorities a little bit of wiggle room to look in the database. That had nothing to do
Right.
with forensic genealogy if we're talking about the same case.
Okay, I think it was something like that. Familiar sounds right. Wish I remember that better. I guess also speaking of that, it's been a lot of like I don't know if I want to say the word scrutiny, but a lot of angst with people putting their information in, especially back in the day when it first came out, and like Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree, and those platforms using that information to go into like police databases and stuff like that. And I know they changed it to make it, they first, if I remember right, they initially changed it to have it be only violent crimes. And then they kept changing it. But I know, like, again, like there's a little wiggle room here and here. Someone used it. It wasn't the exact way it was supposed to be used. So, like, maybe they got sued again. Could you explain how that whole thing went?
Yeah, I'm saying this, that if you go back in DNA history, and in 1982, when DNA identification was first discovered, the first case ever used DNA fingerprinting was in 1985-86, the murder of 2 girls in Narborough, England. The 2 girls, teenage girls, 2 years apart, had been sexually assaulted and strangled or killed. And small villages, they were very upset, about it. Well, there was a man they had arrested who knew a lot about the first case. He was a custodian at a mental institution in the area. And they had arrested him in connection with the first murder because he seemed to know a little too much. But he didn't know anything about the second one. He denied involvement in either one. So the authorities went to Sir Alec Jeffreys and said, you just invented this DNA technique. Do you think it will help us on the case? So at that time, there was nobody knew what DNA was, whatever. I mean, maybe they knew about blood type. They knew a little bit about DNA because Watson and Crick and the history there, but they didn't know DNA fingerprinting. So they went out and had a dragnet of 5,000 or 6,000 people, and they collected their DNA. And it took a long time to process. Nothing was automated. It was all by hand. And they found that none of those people matched the DNA at the scene of the crime. And this was a problem because they didn't know what DNA was, and they were all laughing, saying, oh, this DNA stuff doesn't work, right? Don't waste your time. A short time later, a woman was at a happy hour, and she overheard a conversation where a man said that he took the DNA test for a friend of his, because the friend had taken a test for another friend who had been in trouble with the law, and he was afraid of getting deeper in water. So the man's at the happy hour, his friend asked him to take the test so there wouldn't be a duplicate. You follow that? So the woman, so in other words, the man at the happy hour was paid to take the DNA test for someone else. So the woman went to the police and reported this, and bingo, they went upstream. They found the guy. His name was Colleen Pitchfork, and he matched the DNA at the crime scene, both crime scenes. So they were able to not only convict him of the 2 murders, they were able to exonerate the man from the custodian of the mental institution. And so I tell you that story because at that time, there was no limit. Nobody knew. There was no restrictions. They went out and did a dragnet, right? Everybody said, fine. But now, over the last 30, 40 years, there are restrictions. There are privacy considerations. The laws have changed all over the place. So you fast forward to 2017, 18, when we started doing this with GenMatch, there were no restrictions on what we could do. Upload Golden State Killer's DNA to GenMatch. Okay, what else are you doing today? What are you having for lunch later? It's nothing. But it sort of became something because when the public reacted, oh my God, they're not using my data to catch that guy. There was a big reaction that GenMatch started placing limits on what, just like with CODIS and Alec Jeffries, there was nothing there, but now, and then they started to regulate it. Well, the minute that the Golden State Killer hit, that, the regulations started to kick into place. And at first it was only sexual assaults and homicides. And then there was a case of a church organist in Utah that had been beaten to within an inch of her life. It was not a sexual assault though. So technically it couldn't be uploaded to GenMatch, but they allowed it anyway. And of course that got in all the news. I talked to the detective who did it, and who the judge, he had to go before the judge normally anyway, and the judge figured out what happened. So it was he felt real bad about it. Well, the GenMatch then opened up the number of crimes. It could be assault, I think kidnapping may be one of them. I don't know all of them. Attempted murder, maybe, I don't know. But they opened it up to more crimes, but at the same time, they allowed people to opt out. That if you didn't feel comfortable with that, you could click and the police can't see your results.
Okay.
Right.
And so it was a good trade-off. Now, my point is that as time moves on, that was, at the beginning, you did 1 case, 5 cases, 10 cases, whatever, 100. But now after 5 years where we've done 1,000, we know more. We know more about the nuances. We know more about, and the policy is going to change in step with what we understand and know.
Right.
So change in policy should not be alarming, or you shouldn't feel like it's deceptive. That's my feeling. The change in policy is a natural evolution of our understanding of what we need to do to navigate public safety, privacy versus public safety.
Right.
So it's a good thing. It's a real good
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I feel like just the way it is explained to people makes it even more scarier. So I think the advocates like you are people in the field, explaining like this through this podcast would actually help them better understand, I hope.
I hope so.
Yeah, I feel that's also our aim as well, because examples of all the cases that you have solved or any cold cases that are out there, like you said, that it's just a matter of time to get into that. And it's not every case is a cold case, so you can get answers, but you have to be receptive enough to the change, I feel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
you're
hope
right.
people-
You know,
yeah.
there are a lot of very thoughtful people here
Correct.
trying to navigate this. And I think the public should be involved, you know,
Yeah.
express your opinion. If you're against it, I'm happy to talk to you,
Yeah.
and I respect your opinion. If you're just going to react and go, oh, I'm not going to let them use my DNA, you know, without
Right,
thinking,
right.
less of a regard for that kind of, and that happens, you know,
Yeah.
and I respect the fact that happens, but I would hope through podcasts like yours
Yeah.
that people really understand the issues and give it serious thought and decide what side of the fence they're on.
Correct. Yes,
Right.
because I see a lot of people, especially like on LinkedIn, I follow a few, that they are working relentlessly to get answers to the people, and especially like cold cases of individuals who have passed like years and years ago, and like giving closure to families is a
Mhm.
very big thing. And I think it's extremely noble, and having that understanding is at most important, because
Yeah.
anything, I feel like people don't think twice before posting something on social media, but they think twice before helping someone in such cases. So like that distinction, I hope that we could bring across to the podcast. I really
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah, and I want to say, you know, we live in a world, people say to me, I'm worried about my privacy. And I say, you have nothing to worry about because you don't have any privacy.
Correct. Oh, I get 100%
You know,
agree with that.
let's say, it's funny, public privacy.
Yeah.
You know, like at my house here, you know, I use my phone. Okay, you're going to know who I talk to. I'm on Zoom with you. But you know, if I want to, and they may know what I'm watching on TV because of social media, but I do have some privacy because I have my own thoughts. You know, I have my own, and I don't need to express that on Facebook. I have
Right.
my own personal privacy around me, but I want to say public privacy is
Correct.
eroding, right? Public privacy
Yeah.
with surveillance cameras and, you know, the internet and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Just one more question. So we know in the community that the scientific working group does a lot in coming up with methods and guidelines for the forensic science field. Is there a guideline that is set for genealogy, or is it work in progress, and is it evolving? Like, if you could share some more details.
There's a lot of efforts to sort that out. I know that the SWIGDAM has a correspondence committee that is looking at a lot of the issues. There's also several states that are passing laws on things like accreditation or the process. There's for example, the DOJ interim guidelines were issued in 2018 that outline stuff like before you try FGG, make sure you see if you have a CODIS hit first, something easy. And this is the flow, you know, you can do these kind of cases or these kind of cases probably. You have to have a designated laboratory official to kind of triage the cases. Here's, you know, credentialing of the people that do it. What happens to the DNA afterwards? It needs to be deleted, destroyed, things like that.
Right.
And then since then, the state of Maryland has been trying to regulate the labs that do this and the genealogists. The state of Utah just passed something about, you know, the disposition of the DNA later. Montana's been working on it. A couple of other states, I think
Right.
Florida. I'm not quite up to date on all that. But this, you know, just like with CODIS and Colin Pitchfork, you know, we're understanding more about.
Right.
We're trying to make it safer. We're trying to make it better. These are not Wild West cowboys interested in devouring your DNA.
Right.
You know, these are very thoughtful people. So as time goes on, and there's another group, and I'm sorry, the acronym is so complicated. It's NVTC something. The lab directors, Matt Gamet and Ray Wickenheiser. Matt is from Idaho. Ray is the forensic lab director in New York for the New York State Police. And
Up in Westchester.
What? Pardon me?
Up in Westchester, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you know him. He and they are putting together like a larger committee of that's going to look at for the public labs only.
Oh, nice.
You know, for the kind of accreditation that you need to work under that kind of system for not only labs, but for also for a genealogist. And they have different committees like technical committee, educational committee, policy committee, you know. And so that's like a larger effort among the community to get it sorted out.
That's amazing. And as it's new in this era, I feel it's just everyone's collaboration would eventually make it more streamlined, I hope.
Yeah.
Just one last question, because like Julian's vision and like the vision of the podcast is like making it simple for the students. Hopefully, incoming students or people in the field watch this podcast. Would you have any recommendations for people, like students especially, like who wish to join forensics and who wish to get into genealogy, as to what subjects they should take, or what kind of characteristics or like qualities do you look for when you're hiring, and anything in particular, any advice you have?
Yeah, I want to say that that's a good question. You know, people ask me this all the time, and in a very simple sense, I would say get just a regular person. I'd say get experience with adoption searches, and get experience with GenMatch, just plain simple. There are a number of Facebook groups that you can draw on knowledge. There are another number of, like there's a number of search angel organizations you can get involved in. There are a number of adoptees out there that need help. And that would get your foot in the water to see how it works. And I would say try and use GenMatch. Don't just rely on Ancestry, because Ancestry has 25 million people, a big ocean of people to get matches. GenMatch has 1.4 million, you know, and only 400,000 are opted in. So when you work with Ancestry, you got lots of data, lots of people, you can contact them because you're on your own. When you work with GenMatch, you're working sort of undercover. You can't just reach out to people. You work with the agency, and you can't, you know, you have a lot smaller fishing pond. So make sure you do that, but make sure you know GenMatch. Don't just rely on all the big fish to go. And then another thing you can do, there are a number of genealogy conventions where you can take classes in this. For if you want to go even more, the University of New Haven offers a certificate program.
Oh, nice.
Where you actually go through more forensics, the more forensics of it, the, you know, phenotyping, the blood crime scene analysis. They have several, you know, modules and a practicum at the end. So you have more of a forensic pipeline there. Now, in the long run, getting a job is going to be, it's sort of hard right now because the job, you know, like I'm not hiring. I picked up somebody recently who's joining us because he's really good at Hispanic cases, and he came highly recommended, you know, but I'm not really hiring a lot of independent contractors right now. So the getting into it as a new person is difficult. There are some people that are setting up their own companies, and that's good, but I want to say you have to already have a strong connection with an agency to just go in. You can't just call them and say, hey, I'm a new company, let me try it.
Right.
And you will have an advantage if you know more about DNA. If you have studied, let's say, things like degraded DNA, bioinformatics, inheritance patterns, you know, that kind of thing, and you have a science background, I think it gives you an edge over, say, people that love genealogy and decide they've done hundreds of adoption searches. Now they're going to try forensics. You know, that's one thing, that's an asset. Another thing is if you have a science background and you've done that, I would consider you a lot more seriously.
Right. No, that's very helpful. Hopefully people can learn something from this. Honestly, it was very informative. Thank you so much. Thank you. Julian, do you have?
Thank you so much. I think, well, actually, I do have a small question. I don't know if it really even means anything, but you know how they have like Ancestry.com and then they have something like AfricanAncestry.com? What is the difference between, like, I guess that those two levels of like regular ancestry and something like African ancestry, which goes into like, they tell you what part of the continent you're from or what tribe you're from? Like, is that just like more It is more descriptive, but how does that work, I guess?
Well, now, you're African American. You can tell me if I'm right. My impression is that the African American community, excuse me, is more interested in their ethnic origins. Where in Africa are you from?
Right.
What is your background? And quite commonly, you might be from several places in Africa now, after a few generations. But still, that's a very rich cultural experience you might want to know about, other than, your life today.
Exactly.
And just like I know Irish culture because I was raised that way. You weren't raised with the African culture, but you might want to know about that because that's part of you.
Right.
And so, but the Ancestry, let's say the big companies are catering to everybody, and most of their customers, I think, are Caucasian European like me, because just like you, I don't know where I come from, but I'm more interested in my name, my last name. You would be more interested in your culture. I would be more interested in connecting people with my last name or my genealogy more, and less, where part of Ireland am I from?
Right.
That's later. I want to find out do I have relatives living in New York? And my great-great-grandpa came here, and I don't know where, I'll figure that out, and then I'll say, oh, okay, I know where in Ireland he's from. Whereas African Americans, I think, are more interested where in Africa they're from, and not so much their last name, since there's a relatively shallow history with that.
Right.
This is more about the questions that you're trying to answer as to which
Yeah,
will be the
different set
best
of
for you.
questions, exactly.
Right.
Different set of questions.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colleen,
All
once
right.
again. Honestly, thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Send me the link. You hear? Send me the link when y'all have your stuff together and you're gonna
Yes.
put it up there.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
See
so
you
much.
guys.
Have a great night.
I will. Bye.